Hello, government students. This is Mrs. Politsky, and I have your notes for Chapter 3, Section 3, the amendments. And so this is just kind of a very simple recap of the 27 amendments. There are some things here that you can fill in as we go along, but this might provide a little more clarification to some of the things that we've been talking about. When we take a look at Amendment 1, there are basically 5 freedoms that are guaranteed. Freedom of religion, freedom of speech, freedom of press, the right to peacefully assemble, meaning that you can gather as long as you have permission to maybe protest. And then the right to petition government, which is your right to tell the government how you feel. Amendment 2 guarantees your right to keep and bear arms. Amendment 3 guarantees that no one can be forced to quarter soldiers in private homes in peacetime and limits it during times of war. This was something that the British were doing, and thus it kind of gets added. But if you go back and you look at maybe the English Bill of Rights, which was written in like 1688, the British even had something like this. So it's kind of ironic that they would force this upon the colonists. But obviously, Americans decided that it needed to be added to their own constitution. All right. Amendment 4, this protects people against unreasonable searches and seizures, meaning that you need to have warrants for arrest of a person or a search warrant for search of a property. Granted, there are certain times when we surrender this right. So, for example, a lot of times when we talk about schools, your Fourth Amendment does not always apply, especially if there's concern about illicit drugs being brought onto the premises or weapons. Amendment 5, this is the biggie. This guarantees that people cannot be forced to testify against themselves in a criminal case, meaning that if you are a defendant, they can't call you up to the witness stand. You would have the right not to testify. You also have some other rights. No one may be tried without an indictment. It kind of looks like indictment, but it's pronounced indictment by a grand jury. This is usually used in cases where we're talking about like capital offenses like murder. Grand jury just basically goes through to see if there's enough evidence to proceed with a court case. Okay, no one may be tried twice for the same crime. That's kind of known as double jeopardy. That no one shall lose life, liberty, or property without this thing called due process of law, which basically means that there are certain procedures that have to be followed. For example, if you're arresting someone, you have to read their Miranda rights in this day and age, or you have to allow people to know what they're being accused of. Okay? The government may not take private property for public use without paying a just compensation for it. This is why assessing land is kind of important. So then that way, if the government needs your property, that they will pay you what it is actually worth. Amendment 6 guarantees a right to a speedy and public trial by jury, the right to question and obtain witnesses, and also the right to have legal counsel. That basically means having an attorney. Amendment 7 guarantees a jury trial in civil cases. Civil cases is like when two people sue one another, usually for maybe a contract not being fulfilled, or maybe an injury kind of thing, like what we would call tort law. Eighth Amendment prohibits unusually high bails or fines. It also forbids cruel and unusual punishment. A lot of times that is now kind of refers to capital punishment. Amendment 9 gives rights not mentioned in the Constitution to people. It's kind of a catch-all. Amendment 10 reserves all power not given to the federal government to the states or the people of the states. Amendment 11, it limits lawsuits brought against the state in a federal court by individuals from states or foreign countries. Amendment 12 changes the procedure for electing the president and vice president. Basically, members of the Electoral College will vote for them on separate ballots. That way, we don't have a tie or a situation like we had back in 1800 when Whoever got first place became president, whoever second place got vice president, and they really were of two totally different political parties. Amendment 13 abolishes slavery. Amendment 14 states that states guarantees that states may not interfere with a U.S. citizen's due process of law. So it's kind of like the Fifth Amendment, but it applies at the state level. States may not deny a citizen the right to due process or equal protection of the law. It also defines American citizenship. So, Amendment 15, this basically guarantees the right to vote regardless of race, color, or previous conditions of servitude. In other words, it's kind of the last of the Civil War amendments saying that slaves, particularly men, would have the right to vote. Amendment 16 allows Congress to levy and collect income tax. Amendment 17 requires the direct election of U.S. senators. It used to be that state legislatures would do that, so in a sense it kind of changes the wording of the U.S. Constitution. Amendment 18 prohibited the making, transporting, and sales of alcoholic beverages. 19th Amendment guarantees suffrage to women. Moving on. The 20th Amendment, aka the lame duck amendment. It changes the start of congressional and presidential terms. It used to be, back in the olden days, before this amendment, that we would inaugurate a president in the month of March. And this is going to move inauguration to January. And typically the first Monday in January is when we install members of Congress. It also moves the inauguration date for the president to the 20th of January, which sometimes is one way that I can kind of remember this amendment, because the 20th Amendment and the 20th of January, they do kind of go hand in hand here. So this amendment also provides for cases in which a presidential or vice presidential candidate fails to qualify or dies or is disabled before taking office. So it kind of like tells us how we're going to put people into their place as far as like vice president and so forth. Amendment 21 repeals the 18th Amendment. It also does some other things. It talks about the regulation of alcohol and allows for the government to kind of like regulate it in the sense where they require like the volume of alcohol per ounce to be labeled on the packaging. It also talks about the taxation on it as well. Amendment 22 forbids a president from serving more than 2 terms. 2 terms and 22 is how I remember this. Though, there is one other little caveat. 22nd Amendment also says that the maximum amount of time that an individual can serve as president is 10 years. So what this would basically mean is that an individual who was a vice president would succeed a president maybe halfway through their term, serve maybe 2 years, and then run for president, maybe win, and then win a second term, and that would give you a total of 10 years. That's the most you can have. Amendment 23 gives the District of Columbia, their residents, electoral votes, not any more than the least populated states. So in other words, they get 2 senators and 1 member of the House of Representatives. I remember this by the little rhyme, DC 23. The 24th Amendment abolishes poll tax. It also gets rid of like literacy test, grandfather clauses, that kind of stuff. Amendment 25 provides a batting order or an order of succession for the office of the president in cases of disability, death, or removal of office. This is one that is kind of important because it changes kind of what was thought to be traditionally the batting order. Today, it basically goes president, vice president, speaker of the House, president pro tempore, and then secretary of state. There was a time that a lot of people thought secretary of state would become vice president ahead of like the speaker of the House. So this kind of sets the order. for that. But it also talks about like if a person is disabled, what happens. And that can mean like if, let's say, a president is sedated for a medical procedure, it basically talks about the fact that the vice president would assume the role of president, and then as the president comes to, then you would have a vote of the members of the cabinet to reinstate the president. It is possible that somebody could decide not to do that, and the individual would be, kind of outed out of office because of a medical procedure. Okay. 26th Amendment, this gives the right to vote to any citizen 18 years or older. And finally, the 27th Amendment regulates compensation for services of senators and representatives. What this basically means is that members of Congress can't vote themselves a pay raise and receive that pay raise in the same session of Congress. They have to go through at least another voting cycle. And that might mean, like in the Senate, usually a third of the Senate is up for reelection every 2 years. That might mean a third of the Senate might lose that election and they wouldn't get their pay raise, but the new people would. Members of the House, they're up for reelection every 2 years. So if I didn't like the fact that my member of the House of Representatives voted for this, I can vote him out of office. So that's kind of how this works. This amendment originally was proposed within the original Bill of Rights, but it took until 1992 to get it added. All right. Thank you very much.